Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth.
I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change.
We do not care whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It's got to be a do-or-die effort. It's got to be a determined effort. You've got to show me all the guts and determination you've got in your body. Is a quote by the legendary AFL figure Ted Whitten, who played and coached in over 550 games at the highest level of his sport. I thought this was an apt quote for our guest today, someone who created history and broke the glass ceiling as the first female AFL president, overseeing 3 premiership wins during her tenure at Richmond Football Club. Our guest today is Peggy O'Neill AO, Chancellor of RMIT University, Chair of Vanguard Superannuation, a consultant to Lander and Rogers, and a board member of Women's Housing Limited and Home for Homes, an initiative of the Big Issue. Growing up in the United States, Peggy finished a law degree in West Virginia before relocating to Melbourne, where she became solicitor and later partner at Herbert Smith Freehills. In Australia, she served on the boards of MLC Super Limited and the Commonwealth Superannuation Corporation, and was also chair of the Law Council of Australia's Superannuation Committee and a consultant to the federal government's review of the superannuation system. Moreover, Peggy was appointed to the Australian Institute of Sport Athlete Wellbeing and Engagement Advisory Committee and served on the AFL's Mental Health Steering Committee. She was on the Victorian Ministerial Council on Women's Equality for 3 years and was the inaugural co-chair of the Victorian chapter of the Minerva Network. Peggy was chair to the Victorian Minister for Sport's inquiry into women and girls in sport and active recreation, and is well known as the immediate past president of the Richmond Football Club from 2013 to 2022, having been made an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2019 for her services to Australian rules football, financial services law, and women in leadership. In 2021, Peggy was awarded Melburnian of the Year. In 2022, she received Vic Sports Award for Outstanding Contribution to Sport and will be inducted as an AFL Life member in 2024. Hello and welcome to another episode of No Limitations, a show where we speak to elite world-class performing men and women and unlock the secrets and influences that have shaped their destinies and that you could apply to your own life. For our first-time listeners from all over the world, please don't forget to follow on your preferred podcast platform and share with your friends and colleagues. And for our listeners in Senegal, Brazil and Romania, a big hello. I am your host, Greg Robinson, Managing Partner of Blenheim Partners, Board and Executive Search Firm. In a compelling conversation, Peggy discusses her start in life in a small coal mining town in the Appalachian Mountains, to meeting an Australian backpacker in Greece, relocating with him to Melbourne, and from there, scaling the heights of law, sport and business. Initially an outsider, Peggy gives us great insight into her storied presidency of the Richmond Football Club, where she set out a new strategic agenda, the pillars for success, the goals on and off the field, which culminated in 3 premierships in 4 years under her stewardship. A trailblazer for women in sport, Peggy describes the euphoria of Richmond's success, but also credits mindfulness and a calm approach in being able to transition herself from a self-described imposter to the inner sanctum of sport and business in Australia. More recently, as chair of the organising committee for the now cancelled Commonwealth Games 2026, Peggy shed some light on the behind-the-scenes challenges. As Chancellor of RMIT, presents her philosophy on education, and lastly, provides her view on the nature of leadership in today's society. So sit back and enjoy Bears on Bicycles. Peggy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I haven't seen too many bears on bicycles lately. Where did that come from?
When I first became president of the Richmond Football Club in 2013, and being the first woman who had held that role in the AFL, some people thought it was unnatural for a woman to be so involved, and they said it's like watching the bear on the bicycle. So I think this is against nature. So I just stored that away, and I thought, I can ride a bicycle pretty well. So we'll just see what happens after that. But it is one of those phrases and I think when you take on a public position like that, you think, how can people who don't know me have an opinion? But they do.
And are we seeing more bears on bicycles these days?
Yes. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot more women take leadership roles in the AFL and across sports generally. I think there's a lot more to do, but at one point, there were 4 of us who were presidents of football clubs in the AFL. Now there are 3 since I've finished my 3 terms as president. And there's a woman who's now general manager of football across the whole AFL down at AFL General Headquarters. We're seeing more. We would love to see more women in coaching positions. And I think with the AFLW, there's some of that, but it's still male-dominated coaching. And I say when we have as many women working in men's football as men working in women's football, then that would be about right. But as long as we're still counting how many women are doing what roles, there obviously aren't enough because they still stand out from the crowd.
Well, it's been an impressive story, and I think if I recall, I'm not sure this is true or not, but did you really keep a return ticket to the US and the top drawer at home for 3 years?
I did.
Is that true?
I did. Well, I was pretty homesick, and I moved to Melbourne in August of 1989, and I was required to return to law school to get requalified to practice. And so I had until February when school started, the university's term started again. And of course, being from the Northern Hemisphere, I assumed everybody started school in September. Those assumptions you make. No, they're finishing up the terms coming up, so you'll have to wait. And I had a return ticket then to go back for Christmas, but I was applying for permanent residency and I couldn't leave the country, it turns out, unless you lost your place in the queue for permanent residency. And that was another story. And along the way, I thought, if things get really bad, I'll just always keep this return ticket until suddenly I felt at home. I have a couple of other friends who had moved from America at about the same time. We're still very good friends, the 3 of us. And we thought 3 years is about when you feel more involved where you are than where you left. If you make a good effort and the 3-year mark, you should feel at home. And it was a little before that, but about the 3-year mark, I started thinking, I don't really think I need to dash to the airport on 24 hours notice and try to use my ticket. But homesickness was quite acute. And, it was the days before the internet. And I remember there were postal strikes fairly often and phone calls were very, very expensive to the States and to here. And all those kinds of things that just made you aware that you were far away from where you'd grown up.
So what do you reckon, when you look back at it, allowed you to accelerate and do what you've achieved in this country called Australia?
I'd always been interested in living somewhere other than a tourist. I did like travel. I didn't know that I would move somewhere for the rest of my life. So there was a natural curiosity about how things worked. And then once I was requalified for law, I thought, I really need to get a job because that gets you more involved in the community. I didn't know how you went about getting a job here. It's a different system. In the U.S., we didn't have barristers and solicitors. You were just a lawyer. So it took me a little while to figure that out. And then I had a job, and then I got all interested in sort of learning a whole new system a whole new legal system. So that was quite intellectually challenging for me. And along the way, I made a lot of good friends. And so I started thinking, I think I could make a go of it here. And didn't mean I didn't miss back home, but the day-to-day was quite interesting to me. And Australia is a pretty good place to live, is what I found out. I'm from small towns, and so I'd never lived in a city before. But I thought Melbourne's a pretty civilized place. Things are easy and accessible, and compared to big cities in America, very safe.
The obstacles to succeed, you obviously overcome them. Was there many roadblocks? I'm sure there are, which we'll cover off on this journey. Like they say, not too many bears on bicycles, but you've achieved a lot in a very short period of time.
Well, I've been here 30 years now, so it's not that short a period of time. But I guess that once you find a place where you, for example, work, you enjoy working, and a place you enjoy living, and a place that provides you with a lot of opportunities, then you settle in and enjoy it. And for example, I never thought I would want to work at a big firm, but that's where I was offered a job at first. And I realized that big firms have different personalities, and I thought I was doing interesting work and good work. Obstacles, just the loss of confidence when you come to a new place and you try to figure out the system and you don't know anyone, you didn't go to school with anyone, all of those sort of natural contacts. My family wasn't here.
But isn't the flip side of that you're redefining yourself as well?
Well, yes.
You're not judged by all that legacy of the past?
Well, that's right. You don't have the responsibility of the past. And sometimes you miss that, because I remember thinking there's no one here who's witnessed my life in the way that in small town America, you knew the space you occupied and you knew the connections everybody had. And some people find that stifling. And for the most part, I found it kind of comforting that small town life where I lived was pretty good. And but when I moved here, it was moving into something new. I'd always had an intellectual curiosity about the world. And while we sort of spoke the same language, we sort of didn't. And one of the things I did to just sort of document those early days is I kept notebooks of different phrases and what they meant. And the other day, I mentioned that to someone, and I found all those old notebooks. I did 17 of them.
Yeah, right.
Over those first few years, things I went to, people I met, phrases I heard, and to go back and read it and realize how new everything was. And for example, talking about sport, is I went to a seminar at the law firm when I first moved here, and there were all these references to cricket. Yeah. And I didn't know anything about it, but I thought, well, if a stranger had walked into an American law firm, there probably been a lot of references to baseball.
Yeah.
Or football, gridiron. Mm. And so I thought, gee, you start to think your silo is the only silo, and that's the world sort of understands. And being from America, where you think you're the center of the world, you think, oh, everybody must do things by reference to us. And it sort of puts you in a place where you think, wow, people around the world do things differently. And I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah, but you're a trailblazer in many ways. You're the first director female of Richmond Football Club. You're the first female president of Richmond Football Club. That doesn't happen without breaking a few eggshells, without putting yourself out there in the right position, does it?
Well, I think you have to be open to opportunities that you might want to pursue. I think that when the door opens, if it's something you're interested in, you might just have to walk through and figure it out afterwards. And I think that came, as I said earlier, about when you've lost your confidence. But then with sport and with Richmond, because I picked them as my team, because when I moved to Richmond, and that was my local team. I didn't know anything about the sport really, but I thought I'll support my community club. And people said to me, oh, they used to be good. And back in the 70s, I thought, oh, they'll be good again. I didn't know how long it would take to get good again. I'd always liked sport. Growing up, I loved sport. And so when I moved here, to find that there were professional sport within a 10-minute walk of my house, I thought, well, I'll get involved in what Melbourne and most of Australia gets involved in all the time. And I just loved the sport from the beginning. So it was sort of the passion of the community around sport, the idea that it's a collective. And I guess if you're an outsider, you start to think about what are the pathways into your new community. And it turned out to be something I didn't have to work very hard at because I just loved it. So when I was approached about joining the Richmond board, I was already in love with the game. And I was, a very avid fan. And in fact, in high school, I'd like sport all the time growing up. I was voted most school spirited because I went to everything. Okay. So that gives you an idea. But in small town America, probably like sort of small town Australia, sport is a real community center. When I was asked to join the Richmond board in 2005, I thought, well, this opportunity is not going to keep coming around. And they were determined to bring a woman on the board, which I thought was quite important, especially at that early stages of the development of, diversity and gender equality around board tables. And I thought the worst thing that can happen is you're not very good at it, you don't like it, and you go back to just watching the game. I thought I'll take it on. And by then I was pretty interested in the business of football. Yep. Why are some teams rich and why do some clubs don't have any money? And how do you build to winning a premiership? How do you select players? What happens to sponsors? Who are the members? Why do some clubs really seem to value and do the right thing by members? Others don't. But I just thought, how do you make money at this? And it's a not-for-profit, but you got to have a certain amount of capital. I didn't understand exactly what role the AFL Commission played. So all of that was of interest. And then being a lawyer, I thought governance was really important. And that wasn't something that sporting clubs talked about very much at the time. And I thought, well, maybe that's my role. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do, because I certainly can't tell anybody about how to pick a team, but I think I can. I'd worked with boards a lot in my legal role that I could make some contribution that would be valuable around governance and getting things set up and with committees and that sort of hygiene stuff that you have to do. And if you get it right, everything's easier. And so I went about doing that day to day, helping the president and the rest of the board around that. I thought that's something I can contribute.
Were you surprised when you were nominated for president?
Yes, I sort of was. I'd been on the board 8 years by then. And so it's the fellow directors that elect the president. And so people knew me, and I had done a lot of work around the club and had helped set up one of the fundraising groups. And so when I was encouraged by the outgoing president to think about it, I thought, again, sort of like becoming the first director, well, there's nothing ventured, nothing gained. And if I'm no good at it, the board will let me know. So I said I was interested, and there were a couple of other people interested, and we did presentations. And in the end, the board and all men elected me. And I thought, well, maybe they obviously have confidence you can do the job. And sometimes people have more confidence in you than you have in yourself. But I thought, well, I'm going to do the best I can. And I'm sure that I'll be told whether I'm doing a good job or not. I didn't know that I would be told what kind of job I was doing before the job had even started. But it was, it was sort of a surprise. But at the same time, I knew Richmond. I knew the club. I knew that part. What I didn't know was the wider universe. And I thought naively that this will be a story for a week or so, and then it'll go away.
Yeah, okay.
And one thing that did give me pause in taking on the role was the media scrutiny that comes with it. And I thought, well, what's there to say? I'll just have to go with that. I have a friend of mine, I was talking to him and I said, well, maybe I can get somebody else to do that. And maybe I can get and he said, no, the role is do it all. And if you don't want to do it all, then it's not the job for you. And you really need to, it isn't the old job as being a director. This is a new job. And if you can't take on every aspect of the new job, just stick with the old job. That's okay. But I think you can do the new job. And it occurred to me that the reason I was so uncomfortable is because I was going to be required to do some new things, and I was going to have to go through that trial and error to sort of get through it. And so that was one of the things that I really had to consider. It was the hardest part of the role. The part about chairing a board, working with the CEO, understanding the club, I knew that. What I didn't know was the outside interest in everything that was AFL. And it's quite different being the president than being on the board.
Thinking back all those years now, when you walked into that room and presented to the board, Peggy, what was the vision? What did you put forward? And when you look back at it, how much came true?
Well, we aren't the CEO, so it wasn't that kind of vision. There was no sort of reform. We had reform agenda that I had. I thought we were on the right track. We had done so much work in that 8 years. When I joined the board in 2005, we were $6 million in debt. We only turned over about $42 million as an entity. It's one thing that you sort of understand is these clubs are not big organizations. They're small organizations, and the turnover isn't great, but they play a big role in the community.
What was the membership like then too?
26,000, about that, and sort of a struggle to get there. The year before I joined, in 2004, we lost $2.5 million that one year. So when I came on, the auditor was threatening a qualified audit. We were going to have trouble getting insurance. So I thought it's not going to be fun for a long time, but there were some really good people on the board. And so we worked to stabilize the finances first. And we went into a very conservative budgeting. Our one pledge was we would incur no more debt, and we would never incur any more operational debt, and that we would budget conservatively and never spend money we didn't have. So that meant we weren't going to be able to invest a lot in football for a very long time while we just tried to get out of debt, because the servicing of that debt was really very, very expensive. So by the time I became president, we were working our way out of that. We were debt-free. We had hired a new coach and a new CEO in August of 2009, Brendan Gale and Damien Hardwick that same month. And we had started to show progress. Yes, it's for any organization to hire two senior people like that at one time. And Brendan had never been CEO, and Damien had never been a senior coach.
Exactly.
So something went right that month. And Brendan's still there. Damien just left, and I left in December. So a lot had been done, and we were starting to turn things around. We had made finals for the first time in 12 years in the season of 2013, and I became president of October 2013. And I remember thinking, and it's not a basket case right now, that there's something to work with. But over time, because 2013 we lost in the finals first game, 2014 we lost in the finals first game, 2015 we lost in the finals the first game. And I remember having a conversation with the CEO, and I said, we've made it to good, that good to great. We're competitive, and we were happy for a while, but we're going to have to push through this. And of course, he was of the same mind, but it's how do we do it? What are the things we need to do next? Because I think we've done just about all we can with the strategy we're pursuing right now.
So you've been a good contender, but you just haven't got the ability to win.
And fans, rightly, and I think all of us were disappointed that we never seemed to be able to take that next step. And the coach was coming up for his contract renewal. And so deciding, do you stick with the same person, or do you start all over in football? And so that took a great deal of time and consideration, and there was no sort of rush on that decision. Back to what you were saying about what did I present to the board in 2013 was we're on the right track. We're on the right track, and we have something to work with that we could see the next premiership. And of course, our CEO was quite visionary, and he had predicted 3 premierships by 2020. And we were thinking, finals would be pretty good. And that came to pass.
Where are you from? Where do you come from?
Well, I'm from the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, is where I was born. And every time I hear that Take Me Home Country Roads, I think I'm the only person who probably has been there. And I know all of those things. That was sort of an anthem on school buses everywhere to sing that song, the John Denver song. Yeah. So I grew up in the mountains, coal communities. In fact, the town where I was born doesn't exist anymore. It's a ghost town. So it was probably 50 people, and it was all miners' houses. And my dad was a coal miner when I was first born.
Wasn't the whole family historically?
Yeah.
Like, how many generations of coal mining?
Since the early 1800s, I would have thought. That was the economy. And because it's in the mountains, there's some farming, but it's not farming commercially or farming for any of that. It's coal and timber, and that was it. And in fact, there's a tiny little cemetery, a family cemetery up on a mountain in Maple Meadow, West Virginia, where my great-grandfather and grandfather are buried, and uncles. So that was from 1812, I guess.
Yeah, right.
But they were the relatives from the O'Neill side, the Irish side, were in America before the Revolutionary War. So it's a lot of time in the mountains.
And what do you say? Would you say the town was the size of 50 people?
Yeah, it was all miners' houses, and I started school there.
School was pretty basic for what I've read.
2 rooms, 7 grades, and then
Is that right?
if you made it through that to go to high school, it was about an hour bus ride each way to this town down the mountain. Looking back on it, it's kind of an amazing story, but when you're there and you're a child, you just think, well, this is the way people live. You don't have any sort of greater idea. And the mines were still operating then. And one of my memories is there was the railroad, which carried all the coal to market, went in front of all the miners' houses. And the school was on the other side of the railroad tracks. And so if the train was moving, we had to wait to go to school until the train stopped. And if the train stopped, and this, I do remember doing this, the train stopped, sort of all the mothers would go down to the edge of the tracks, and when they'd go now, and we would go under the coal cars and up the other side and go to school.
You serious?
Yeah. And so that was, it sounds comical now, and I guess it is, but it's pretty, it tells you that it was, a different kind of place. And I remember there were also a number of ponies that had escaped from the mines over the generations, I suppose. And I always wanted one of them. So there were feral ponies that would run through the schoolyard, and we'd all have to go back inside till the ponies stampeded through. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but it was part of that life. And my mother said, no, you cannot have one of those ponies. So I do remember that. But it was a lot of freedom, a lot of everybody watching out for each other. And then my father became a truck driver, and we moved to another town in the region that had maybe 1,000 people, and then another place after that. So, but all my schooling was done in West Virginia, and then we moved into Virginia, just across the border, at all sort of on one side of the Appalachian Mountains or the other. And that's where I went to high school. And
what do you reckon when you look back at the values that one gains from growing up in a small town?
Oh, I guess a sense of self-sufficiency, in a way that everybody has to help each other when you're in a town that's that small. Somebody has the chainsaw, and somebody has the lawnmower, and and you all help each other. Or if somebody's ill, and you all sort of pitch in. And I think, looking back, that was probably one of the things that sticks with you that you're not really aware of until later in life, and you think, well, this is something I should do myself. And sometimes I think, well, why don't you ask for help? And it's like, well, my parents would expect me to do this myself. So I think that's one of the things, and understanding the importance of helping others. And I think it was those sorts of neighborhoods, and watching my mother and father's example of volunteering, and to always thinking, no matter how little you have, that you can help somebody. And I look back and I think, I don't know how my mother did this, but she was always the one who was getting the Christmas hampers with food put together for people. And I look back and I think, well, why did she think, we didn't have that much money either, but we had more than most. So our job was to help those. And she, volunteered in church school, and she volunteered in helping to teach. And anyway, it was a great example. And my father, taught in church and the men's Bible study class, and church, like sport, is a big part of life in those small communities. It's about the only social outlet that you have. But I look back and I think it was always, well, you're supposed to be helping somebody.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Academically, you were strong as a young person?
Yeah, I was. I loved school.
But how do you go when you're academically strong in a small school in the 7 grades?
Well, we moved after a year in that school, and I was too young to start school, but everybody was going to school. So they told me I could just come, and I just kept going. And so I was, and there was no kindergarten or anything like that. You just started first grade. So I was almost 5, I guess. And so but I remember saying to the teacher, but I don't know how to read. And she said, you come to school, we'll teach you how to read. And so I just fell in love with all of that. And my mother had, read to us as children all the time. And so I just wanted, I guess, to be educated. And my mother and father both were not educated people themselves, or not as educated as they wanted to be. And so they said often, if you want to go to university, you can go. And in America, that's a big deal, that you have to save money forever and ever. And so there was never any sort of limit on how, if we, and my younger sister also, and there was, I'm sure if we weren't academically inclined, that would have been fine too. But it was this idea that you can go as far as you want to go, and we'll help you. And so I liked school. I did well in it. I just wanted to study and read all the time. I wasn't necessarily an outdoorsy person. I'd much rather be inside reading a book or studying something. And then when I went to university, I loved that even more. And then I went to law school and didn't love it all that much, but grew to love it. And then when I practiced law and helped clients, I liked that a lot. So I was strong academically, and I enjoy learning now. If I could have made a career out of just going to school, I would have.
Did you build yourself a reputation in law school?
Yeah, it was a bit different going to law school, and I wasn't, not having, I was the first one in my family to graduate from university, so I didn't have an example about what it would be. I didn't know any lawyers. Well, I knew a couple, but they weren't in my family. One of them was a family that went to the same church as us, and they were lawyers, so they gave me a summer job to sort of go to the courthouse and help carry books around and things like that so I could watch. It's a different way of thinking. And it took me a few months to figure that out, and then I liked it. But I remember my first year, it's a 3-year graduate degree in America, sort of like the system that's coming into lots of places in Australia now. And yep. I remember the first semester, and by the time you've reapplied to law school, you're really dealing with people who've done very, very well. And I remember they called us together before they released exam results and said, some of you will never have been second in anything in your life. And you're not a bad person, but you're going to not do so well, some of you, and just take it for what it is. And I thought, because my first semester grades were average, and I thought, I've run up against my limitations here.
Okay, yeah.
And then I got in the hang of how you think and how you analyze problems. And so because I was more an arts person, and it was like, structuring your thinking. And then I just sort of took to it after that. So the second and third year I liked a lot. Yeah.
Where's your confidence at? Because you say you've come from a family, you're the first member of that family to ever go to university. And I'm sure you're up against a pedigree of people who historically have had the kids and their father and their grandfather go to university. Mm. Where's your confidence?
Well, I guess I liked the environment of studying. And I guess I'd had some idea that if I worked hard enough, I could do it. I could understand it, which was why that first semester in law school, I was working hard and I wasn't getting the top results like I had been used to. And It was because you had to be trained in a profession. You had to do something else. It wasn't just reading and writing an essay about something. Where does the confidence come from? Probably, my parents' encouragement all along the way. And then there was a correlation between putting in the work, finding something you like, and then advancing to the next stage of that. So I guess I sort of relied on, I think I'm smart enough to do this. I think I can do it.
Okay. What did you specialize in at law?
Well, when I started practicing law, I first thought I started a law firm, and I was the first woman they had ever hired in their 100 years. And it was the biggest law firm in the state. There's a bit
of a theme throughout your career.
Yeah, in the state of West Virginia. It was a big firm. I was the 33rd lawyer, first woman, and they needed someone to help out in tax. And I'd done well in tax in law school, and I thought, oh, okay. And at the same time, there was a new specialty that was being developed in pensions and employee benefits and superannuation here in industrial relations. And so that the tax sort of straddled both of those. And so I thought, well, I'll do tax if I can do these other things. And I really liked it because it had a mixture of common law, history. It had a lot of statutes. It had a lot of interpretation, and it was new. So in a way, everybody is studying at the same time or catching up with the legislation. So you're not way far behind on everybody else. No one's been doing this for 20 years. So I did that. And then when I came to Australia, it was developing as a specialty here. And so I went into financial services and superannuation, and that's where I've spent most of my career.
Okay. In between that, age of 21, you pack your bags and shoot off to Greece?
No. 21, I saw the ocean for the first time. It was a couple of years later that I went to Greece. But growing up in the mountains, it's not something you do very often to go to the ocean. Some people do, but my family didn't really. On our holidays, we went to see Grandma, who lived even further up in the mountains, and and helped out with the garden and those kinds of things. So, but no, I really had an interest in the world and in traveling, and was a great consumer of news and current affairs. And back when there was only a couple of channels, as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I guess I started watching the nightly news every night. And there was a lot going on in America at the time. And so a lot of, when I was that age, it was assassinations of presidents and Martin Luther King and all of those kinds of things. So it was very violent, almost revolutionary time in America. And I was really interested in politics. So I was interested in the world and thought that while I like a small town, I really want to see lots of things. And
so where'd you go? Where'd you take off to when you finally had the chance?
Well, my first trip in leaving the U.S. is I went to Jamaica with some friends because it seemed close enough. But it was in the 80s, mid-80s, and there'd just been the revolution, and we got really cheap flights because there were still armed guards around most everything. But I had a wonderful time. So that was sort of the beginning. And then my friends were travelers, and so the next time they planned a trip to Greece, I went with them there. And then along the way, I went to England and France and Mexico and some of those places. So it was, and then it was every time I get a chance, I want to go overseas.
So what value do you place on travel and the perspectives that you gain?
Oh, it's, the perspective is a perspective outside yourself. I think a more accurate perception of assumptions you make if you use it to examine things that you take for granted and let it expand that horizon. Sometimes because it can be uncomfortable, especially if you're traveling a long ways the first few days with jet lag, you want things to be just like what you left. But if you start to understand that people have solved problems in different ways, people have different problems that your country might have solved, I think it takes away a lot of the fear of the unknown, or you can, no matter whether you've been to the country or not, if you've been out of your environment enough, I think you can say, well, I might not know about that, but I can understand why people might be doing that. And it also gives you, I think, great empathy for how lucky you are And no matter what you might think has been past, grown up in the middle of coal fields and all of that, is you have a tremendous amount of privilege just by the fact of being educated and growing up in a country that has a lot of the services and resources that the rest of the world doesn't have.
Yeah. How did you get to Australia, Peggy? What's the story there?
Well, on my second trip to Greece, I met an Australian backpacker, and he was doing that big Australian trip, 6 months of something. I couldn't believe anybody could travel for that long because I was on the American 2-week vacation. And I remember he was on his way to Gallipoli, and I was going, what's this?
Yep.
Why? And it was May. It was not tourist season yet. But anyway, so we happened to cross over at a ferry stop or something. He said, I'd be coming to America and in a few months, and I didn't think any more about it. And he did, and the next year we got married.
Really? 1 year?
Yeah. And he was sure he could live in America, but that wasn't the case. And so after a couple of years of marriage, I moved to Australia and got requalified and thought I'll try to live in the big city, and there you go. And we aren't married any longer, but I have no desire to live back in America. So.
Okay, so that's the story to get to Australia. And when you get to Australia, you land in Melbourne. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. He had grown up in Melbourne, so start off in Richmond.
Right. Now, you said you love football. Where's the interest? Why do you like this game so much, the great AFL?
It's a spectacular sport. When I first went to my first game, I thought, look how big the ground is. And there's no offsides rule. They just come at you from everywhere.
And we don't have an offensive and defensive team either. We have the one team.
Yeah, that's right. And look how many people are on the ground at the same time. It's like, how many? And all shapes and sizes. And, even if you don't get the goal, you get a point for trying hard. And there was just a lot of athleticism and speed. And I just liked it. And it was not as well attended then as it is now. So, I became a member and I went, but I remember sometimes, we weren't doing very well either. I'd have, rows to myself. And now, you need a reserve seat to get in and membership's gone up. So.
What year did you become a member?
I think it was 93 or 4.
Okay, so you're right in the doldrums.
Yeah. And when I first moved here and became aware of Richmond, there was a fundraiser going on and Save Our Skins because the bank was going to foreclose on some things, as I understand, and we needed to raise $1 million in a week. And they, as Renegade tells me, they had the players out rattling tins in the traffic. And I can't quite imagine we would ask players to do that these days. But so I thought, well, I'll support my local club and I will become a member and not knowing what that meant. But the club survived and but still, as I just mentioned, had a lot of debt, a lot of other things to worry about. And was it going to be sustainable?
So how does someone who's got just more than just interest as a fan get into the inner sanctum that you've done? So obviously you've taken it upon yourself to get to know people, to invest a lot of time. It's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, you volunteer. I went to the games and I loved the games. And then
you're losing every week.
I went to all of them, every one that I could. And I realized a lot of it was I was working at a big law firm at the time, and this was a real release to go to the games. It was something that my life started to revolve around. I thought, how did that happen? That suddenly I was, because everybody, if you had to work on the weekends, you had to go in because there was no work at home stuff there. And so I worked in the city and I would say, well, I have to be finished by 2:00 because I got to get to the Melbourne Cricket Ground because I want to see the game.
You're working 6.5 days a week every week, were you?
Yeah, pretty close. During that, I met a few people and they said, well, you know that you can get a better seat, a reserve seat, if you spend more money. And I thought, oh, okay. And there's this thing called sponsoring a player, and you get to meet a player. I went, really? And you get a good seat. So I thought, well, I'll be a player sponsor. I chose the country guy.
Oh, did you?
I thought he's from New South Wales. He's from the country, and I'll pick him. young guy. He was going to university. I thought, well, I'll pick him. And we're still in touch.
Yeah, really?
After all this time. Yeah. So I did that, and then I was asked to help with a fundraiser. And being a lawyer, people would ask me to do a little legal thing from here to there, every now and then. And so over time, I guess I just got to be more of the fabric of what goes on there. But if you volunteer, it seems the football club always has a job for you to do.
And was it true when in that era there was possums in the gym? Is that true? Is that true?
No, I've seen them. I used to walk home to Richmond from the city, and I'd pass by the old gym, and there were some bricks missing too, and you could see possum tails hanging out. And I thought, this is really pretty bad. And it wasn't air conditioned, and it was pretty makeshift. So one of the things is we need to upgrade things. We need to make this a place people want to come to work. So we had one of the fundraising campaigns was to put in new administration, new gym, and then we had another fundraising where we expanded. But those were all happening at the same time. But no, that's true. And we asked the coach if they would paint the gym themselves.
Good team bonding session.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, what are you going to do all summer? Go paint the... anyway, it needed a lot of work, and you realize how it's hard to take pride in where you work if it's something like that.
When did it click in everyone's head or your head? I'm in the business of sport. Like you say, an organisation like this relies on a lot of goodwill, right, from a lot of meaningful people, but sometimes the value add is pretty minimal until we actually really start thinking about we're going to pull this together as pure business leaders in some form, get the support, get the revenue coming in. With that, we can get good players, we can get programs delivered. When did the penny drop saying, look, if we don't change, we're in trouble. And if we do change, how do we change?
In working on, this is the football clubs, we worked on strategic plans like businesses do. And we had sort of pillars. And in my years on the board before I became president, we had strategic plans. One of those pillars was always community, recognizing our membership's important. The other was diversifying revenue, because you can't just depend on match day receipts. And also you don't want to be dependent on the volatility of whether you're winning and losing. But you find out there's not very many things that you can do to diversify your revenue streams when you don't have any capital to invest. We need a business that requires no capital, and those are few and far between. It's one of the reasons that lots of footy clubs went into gaming, into pokies, because it requires really no capital, and it just sends money to you, and because of the favorable treatment it gets from most state governments. So we looked at revenue there. We looked at being a good place to work. So we started working our way through those. But the basic thing is if you can't get financial stability and if you can't have enough money to do the things you want, you aren't going to last very long, and you're not going to be have much of a future. And the number one thing that the board's responsible for is a club with a future. We worked a lot, and Brenda Gale, as CEO, worked a lot on we need to tap into a different way of thinking. We need to find things, as I was saying, that we don't need capital for. For example, Richmond started a business of running for town councils all over the state and some in New South Wales. They're sport and recreation facilities where you get a fee. It fit in with what we do, health, recreation, bringing together the next generation of sports leaders who might want to run those facilities. And we have more employees doing that now than working at the football club. In one day, once that started and we got 2 or 3 contracts, we have 3 times as many people working in our sport and recreation business than working in football. And that's something that is based in community, and it doesn't fluctuate. Of course, COVID was another story because everything had to shut down. You had to weather all of that. But right away, we knew that we needed money to invest in football. We needed to look for donors that we perhaps had ignored or hadn't uncovered in the past. And for the board, it was almost always the meetings were about money.
Or the lack of.
Yeah, and when I hear about the team and the games, I thought we rarely talked about, we knew the win-loss, and we'd have someone from football. Coach came 3 times a year. The head of football would come in at every meeting, would come more often if we wanted him to. But most of the time it was, how are the finances? And are we, what's the projection? Are we on budget? And because sport, and I think it would be the same with every sport, during the game, we would get text messages from the CFO saying, we budgeted 50,000 attendance. Got 60. And we'd go, whoa, we're winning and we're making money. And sometimes you go, we got 60,000, but we're losing. So that was a bit bittersweet. But we were always, the eye was on the business.
What's the differentiating points, do you think, for the product of Richmond versus the others?
I think our sort of emphasis on community really was early and consistent. And while you're waiting to win, which can take a long time, we thought we need our members to be proud of things that we do. And so we wanted to have, and sport gives you a great platform.
And you can't hide either.
You can't hide. And so you want to be an example of what your club stands for, and you want the people who work there to be that kind of example. But I think that we were very early in looking at gender equality. We commissioned a study on what it would take. I think it was titled "What It Would Take to Be the Best Women and in Sport," and we looked at it from a leadership role, not participation. There was no AFLW at the time. So it was just, why aren't women across all sports? It wasn't just our club. And the AFL and the Australian Sports Commission funded it, and we agreed to be the guinea pig to try the recommendations. And so one of those was getting women on the board, but getting women on committees, getting women into football roles, and also having the executive at the club have more women.
But why did Richmond take an American woman if that's the case? There's a lot of other women I would have thought must have enjoyed, well, not a lot, but there would have been some others you must have been up against. So.
Well, I've been on the board a long time. Maybe I was the obvious one. But when I left as president in December, there were 5 women out of a 9-person elected board.
Yeah, okay.
And across all, and then after a while, the thing was to pull together a pool of candidates so that naturally there would be women and men. And then over time, nobody even thought about it because people would say, well, if I have a chance, I'll be happy to go through the nominations process. For a long time, in my experience, in all sorts of sectors, if women don't think they have a chance of getting the role, they're not going to bother with trying. But if you think that you have an opportunity, if it is truly going to be an open process, you're more likely to go ahead. And then we picked a national charity partner. We became quite involved with wanting to work with Indigenous communities, not just on sport, but on helping to encourage and develop the next generation of Indigenous leaders. So we have, and it celebrated its 10th anniversary last year, called the Korangamagi Institute. And children 15 to 17 from all over Australia come and spend a week and go through cultural training, health and safety, arts, and some of them come back year after year, and there's been well over 2,000 who have come through that in the last 10 years. We also have the Melbourne Indigenous Transition School. 22 7th and 8th graders go to school at Richmond every day in our actual building. And they, during NAIDOC week, have everybody to lunch at their dormitories. And it's in my neighborhood, so I see them going to school and coming back and all of that. So we decided that that was something we wanted to do more in. And we've been consistent. It wasn't something that ticked the box and move on. And I think after a while, people came to trust that we meant what we said that we stood for. And it's a constant, trying to be sure that you don't slip. But over time, it just became part of who you are and what you do. And so I can't imagine that the community aspect would just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But I think that was a real distinctive point for us.
You become president. Was there a lot of pushback when you became president? As like you said, first time you're breaking all convention here historically.
Well, there was, the bear on the bicycle comment. There was a few comments along the line by people I didn't know about, well, who's she? What's she going to bring to it? I now realize I was so much an outsider. I was so different that people didn't know what to expect. Was this truly a changing of the past? Was it going to look different? If this person who didn't go to school here, doesn't sound like us, new to the game, didn't play, didn't have any brothers who played, we don't know this person.
Yeah, this too drastic, right?
Yeah, and where'd she come from? So rather than assume it was okay, I think there was an assumption that it wasn't by some parts of the media. And then it was, oh, she's not talking to the media. And then when I gave some interviews, it was, oh, she only talks to the women in the media. I thought, well, I talk to the ones who arrange interviews with the club, because the club manages all the media stuff, because they give exclusive to some people, not to others. So I started really being upset and thinking in my lawyer way, well, this isn't rational. Why didn't they just call me? Or why didn't they ask for an interview? Or why, if they don't know me, why do they think I'm incapable? And I was really starting to think, this just isn't for me. I don't want to be this upset all the time. I don't want to.
And were you always upset?
Well, I was always thinking, what do people think? And that hadn't been me, because what I'd done up until then, well, lots of times I was pushed into new areas, is I thought you had more contact and people could get to know you. Where these were people where I was probably never going to know them in the same sort of way. And I remember saying to a good friend of mine, in fact, the person who took me to my first Richmond game back in 1993 or whatever it was, I said,
Yep.
I just don't think I have the constitution for this. I just don't think I can. And yes, you can snap out of it. Of course you can do it. And so I just thought, I'm just going to have to quit listening. You can't be second guessing yourself when you're trying to do something new. And you'll know when you get it right and when you don't, but you can't let other people's opinions make you do something that's not you, or try to be somebody that you're not. Because one of the things I've always thought is I had a pretty good sense of myself, and I was sort of on the verge of trying to be something to make people like me more, people that I didn't even know. And I thought, this is not sustainable. So I had a friend who was in law and then became a mindfulness coach. So I did 6 weeks one-on-one with him of just calm the whole thing down, just calm this, stop the train. That really, really helped, because it was like, whew, I got to give a speech. Let me just calm down for a few minutes. And then suddenly it wasn't always easy, but I felt much more capable. And then another good friend was saying to me, he said, well, every year there's a narrative that's constructed in the media, and you're a part in their play. And right now you're their villain. It has nothing to do with you. So just say you're not going to be in their play. And it's sort of hard, but when you turn off everything, and I would still get the newspaper, and I kept a big bin, and I would just fold them and put them in there, and I've saved them all. And I thought, one of these years I will go back and read it when it's all over. And so I've got, every year of my presidency, I've kept all my speeches, all the newspapers, all of that, and the good and the bad. And I thought, someday I'll just go back and see where I started and where I ended up. Not in a vindictive way, but just what the pressure was to become something else. And so anyway, I saw it through with a bit of good advice from a few friends. And then after a while, you find your feet and And there you go. And over time, people who said things said other things.
You're listening to No Limitations with special guest Peggy O'Neill AO. On our next episode, I sit down with Dominic Barton, Chair of Rio Tinto and Chair of Leapfrog Investments.
Australia has transformed China. Whenever I'm in Shanghai or in Beijing, whatever meeting I say, look out the window and look at all that steel in those buildings. That is courtesy of Western Australia.
Be sure to join us on our next episode. And now, back to the show. Peggy, the mindfulness coach, can you talk us through a little bit about that? What do they take you through? As you say, you're putting you back on the tracks. You weren't derailed, but you're just losing a bit of puff to get up the mountain.
Well, I think it was a bit of anxiety about instead of knowing what you're going to say, you were going to be reactive. But a lot of what we did was just calming yourself down. And in the moment, just thinking, okay, it's the routine, the breathing, the making your brain stop. And I remember one time he said to me, well, relax your face.
Oh, really?
And I thought, okay. I don't know how long it's been since I ever relaxed my face. It was like, and so I realized it was like, you must have had a lot of tension that you just forget about.
Yeah, right.
And so a bit of it was just learning how to relax and to relax more completely. And before you give a talk, if you're relaxed and your brain's not going a million miles an hour, then suddenly it's just easier. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's much easier than when you're sort of fighting with yourself internally because you're leaping ahead or you're out of the moment or you're anticipating bad stuff before it happens. And so that's held me in good stead.
Can I ask you about, because I had a chat before I came here, a couple of ladies at the office said, can you explore imposter syndrome? That women suffer from imposter syndrome. Comes up all the time. I've heard it about 5 times last week in interviews. How does one overcome it? How do you negate it?
For me, you think, what is imposter syndrome? If you're not trying to be an imposter, if you're not trying to be somebody else, then you don't really think about it too much. There's things about, am I the right person for this job? But I think more about based on skills. Like, is this something that I don't have the skills for? Well, I might be able to acquire those. And sometimes you're in a job where you think, I just don't like the job. Mm-hmm. I don't fit because it's not for me.
Yep.
But I think it all comes back to, who do you think you are in the nicest possible way? Who are you?
Yeah, but what's holding me back from putting my hand up?
Yeah, and I think sometimes, and I think we all think about this, is we fear failing. But I think over time, you start to think that failure is just the price you might have to pay to finally achieve something. That you fear failure, but you got to get through that to achieve something. And I think many times when I've taken on things, as I've said, if I fail, I'll just go back to what I was doing before. But I might not fail. I might achieve something great. Or I might do something that, leads me in another way, or I learn a lot, or I meet a lot of new people. But you've got to be willing to accept, in most cases, the very small risk you're going to fail. And you know that, but you've got to be willing to take that risk and to say the worst thing that can happen is I'm no good at it and I go back to doing something else.
So that analogy then, early days as president, what were the failures which actually turned into successes?
Oh, the early days of president, the club was going pretty well. I mean, the failures were, I don't mean this the wrong way. I don't think that they were my failures necessarily. There were things that for the business weren't. We were doing well, as I said, but we needed to take that next leap. And along the way, we found people who had that same vision, who wanted to be part of that. And some people wanted it more traditional. And so, you sort of self-select at that point. Do you want to be with the new, or because we weren't going to be the old and we weren't going to slip back into that. and we weren't going to be, I guess, swayed by popular opinion about what we should be. If we had to creep along to get there, it's better than thinking it's going to be an easy fix, because it was never an easy fix. And then there were, times where in 2016, for example, we went backwards. We didn't make finals. We just extended the coach. There was a lot of conversation about get rid of the coach, get rid of me, get rid of Brendan.
Yeah, but that just sells papers too, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And it's a terrible thing not to give people the benefit of the doubt. They're humans, and these are jobs. And I've never known anybody in a football club who didn't care more than the members cared about doing the job well. And no player goes out there to do a bad job on the ground. That's a really disappointing thing. And even now, they go for the coach, go for the coach, go for the coach, and things will be good. And I remember talking to the board and to the CEO, and I said, we can't keep starting over. We can't every 5 years just get a new coach and think. And the CEO did a wonderful piece of work, because the board asked him to look into the past. And every time we fired a coach, and we fired a lot of coaches before I was there, we never got any better. We never got better. And then if you'd build over a couple of years, you'd be sort of on the cusp of doing better, but you hadn't reached what somebody wanted. So you fired that coach, and then you started again. We looked at or asked Brendan and the head of football to look at what is it that we need to do to make football successful. It's not who do we need to get rid of. It's what do we need to make them successful. We want them to be successful. And they were willing to help, because it was, we want you to succeed, so help us understand what more you need. And we had it's sort of, the feeling about things that needed to change, but we needed some evidence. So Brendan went, in effect, a gap analysis. What do we do really well? Who, not just in the AFL, but who in sports world does things better? What were the characteristics of successful teams around the world? And Brendan identified someone who had a consulting business, and he had had a methodology. And so interviewed dozens and dozens of people with Brendan, put a report together, sort of told us what we thought. But the one thing was the coach is the right person. Changing the coach, it just makes you realize that you want to change the things that will matter, but you don't want to change things that are your strong points. And the coach was, the players loved him. He worked really hard. He wanted to be a lifetime coach, but there was leadership lacking on the ground. We needed to get some new thinking around him, but he was the pivot point. So we kept him and changed some people around him and some other things, put a lot of effort into leadership in the department, in the club. I can't say that cost us to win a premiership the next year, but we did. And Damien Hardwick had to change himself. And I had read about a course at Harvard Business School called Authentic Leadership that Bill George has run for years and years. And so the CEO thought it'd be a good idea if Damien went to that. And he wasn't really enthusiastic, but he went. And it changed him. It changed his approach to things. It changed his idea of how he could be at his best as a coach. And so all of those things came together, but there wasn't one big thing, but there were lots of little things that people had to buy into. And one of the things that Damien's philosophy changed is it really needs to be fun to come and work. You got to be excellent at what you're doing, but those players have to really want to be there and like each other and be together. And part of that was saying not everybody is the winner of every game. Everybody's got a part to play, and the role playing and designing a style of play around the team that you had, not the team you wanted to have. And right away when preseason started, it just felt different, and people were saying to me how it was a happy place. It was all of this. And I thought, well, that's better than last year where everybody's just dying to get out of here. Okay. So a lot of things were around.
So Damien is what? Excellence without happiness, and then changed to excellence with happiness, did he?
With happiness, and understanding each other better. That we're not just playing for a few hours and then we leave. And this connection, this strong understanding of each other. Like one person, one of the players, said that he didn't realize until that year, 2017, that the year before, the guy with the locker next to him, his father was really, really ill. But a lot of times indicating you had an issue at home or you were worried was seen as a sign of weakness, and that you might be ruled out, that silly kind of stuff. Oh, it sounds silly, but that was the way it was. Instead of saying, listen, if you're having trouble, now I understand why you're not playing at your best. Let me help you. And so that it just became a much more empathetic place, I suppose. And a lot of things flowed from that, and storytelling and the importance of people buying into a story.
What does that mean? What's storytelling then?
Well, Damien spent a lot of time, a huge amount of time, in having a theme for the year about climbing the mountain or stoicism or something. And every week he would have a little lesson about that. Because when you look at a team of players, they were all men at the time, there's all kinds of academic backgrounds, all kinds of literacy and numeracy. So how do you communicate to everyone that they can understand other than just put plays up on the board or something? And one of it is you buy into the emotion of the storytelling, of the story that's being told. And in fact, the players would get up and talk about, they called the Triple H, the hero, hardship, and highlight of your life. And they would stand and talk about it so you get an idea who that person was. And then it wasn't just the guy, it was a real person, and they all knew and supported each other in different sorts of ways. So there was a lot of that personality, or allowing your personality to come through and your shortcomings to be understood, that made a difference. And it went through all of the rest of the time that he was there. And now lots of other clubs you hear doing the same sorts of things, because you do get results in forging a team, which is what it's about. But you got to move on to the next thing too. It's not all just about that, but excellence is assumed. You can't let that be a substitute for excellent performance, but it's how do you get that excellence in a way that's fun?
How do you see the role of a president of an AFL club? What is the actual role? Because it's changed over the years, as you said. It has.
And it was different when it was amateur days, where the president was in fact the CEO. The president did everything, and they were around and
probably funded half of it as well in the old days as well.
Yeah, and they were there every day, and they were in with the team, and they were doing all of that. And sometimes that notion still persists. And some of the questions I would get in the media sort of had an idea, you've never really worked in a modern football club, have you? Because that isn't something that you would do as a president. And I remember once saying to someone, so if I'm doing that, what's Brendan Gale doing? I was like, we have people who are very highly qualified and capable and well paid. And I always think that the people like to work in places where they can do their work, where they don't have someone coming and saying, well, I don't agree with that. Or, sometimes Damien Hardwick would tease me and say, now, who am I going to leave out this week, Peggy? And I said, if you're asking me, you are in real trouble, because that's what we pay you for. But I think the role of the president is to make sure the board's functioning well, to be sure that the issues coming to the board are fully considered in making important decisions. And there's also this public aspect about being an ambassador for the club, and lots of contact with members and being available, lots of keeping information flow going. I instituted doing a letter to members 3 times a year, do a Q&A online. It was about otherwise people think you don't care, or they think you're hiding something. I used to be really offended when I think, why do they think I'm hiding something? I'm telling you what I know, I just don't know. And I realized it was like, you just got to keep information going. And once those started being available on a regular basis. And I had an email that people could send in questions. And when I collect enough, I would answer them. So I think that's a big part of being a president. You meet sponsors. I used to have dinners after board meetings probably 2/3 of the time, and I'd invite different people to come and have dinner with us so we'd get to know each other a bit better. I thought early on that when the times get bad, we want people to know us. We want to have the benefit of the doubt. And sure enough, times get bad. And at least they've met you and might give you, talk to someone else and say, well, I met them. They seem like decent people. So I think the president has a role that it's sort of like the chair of the board in any company. But the public role is a bit different because your shareholders are your members. And you're sitting at games with them all the time. The shareholders of BHP don't get together every week and sit with the board.
and probably a little bit more passive as well too.
That's right. They wanted a financial return, and football club members want an emotional return. So it's a sort of complex role, and people bring their own sort of views on that. But I see it as primarily a governance role and an ambassadorial role.
Relationship then, how do you form the relationship or bring the best out of the CEO? Because you can't be best friends.
No, you can't. I would say we're friendly but not friends.
Okay.
And you want to be accessible and you have great respect for one another. And so trust is important, but you have to be able to talk things through, to hear the bad news, as well as the good news, to feel that they can do their job without you cutting across it as a president. For example, if Brendan had talked to the head of football about something, then I couldn't go and say, well, that's not right about money or something like that I might actually be accomplished in, because he's the one who's running the place. And I think that we made the CEO our focal point. So he was to carry out the instructions of the board, and then we knew who was accountable. And he's a wonderfully accomplished person, a great leader, and he evidenced the values that we wanted for the club every day. He reinforced them every day. He was a great contributor. And in 2015, it was the first time we made the CEO a member of the board at our discretion. Because I think there's no better way to get information flow than to have somebody with the same joint and several liability that everybody else on the board has. But I think it's that relationship between the chair and the CEO of any organization is a really crucial one. And a lot of it is based on trusting each other so that you get bad news, good news, and you can talk. And so I had that relationship with Brendan and enjoyed it all the way through.
Well, I guess those conversations must have been pretty interesting during those tough times when you had to make a call, as you say, or were encouraged to make a call regarding your coach.
Yeah.
And yet, as you say, after doing your homework, doesn't make necessarily a lot of sense. How tough was it?
Because of all the work that had been done leading up to the decision, and because we, as a board, took several months to make the decision, and it was a collective decision. And then we decided, is it a 1-year extension, a 2-year extension? What do we want to do with this? It was, in the end, to say, yes, we're going ahead. And we talked about what if we go backwards? And it's like, well, we'll just have to ride that out. We think that he's the right person and we will recover and we'll go ahead. So in the end, it wasn't so difficult because the hard work had been done in the lead up, I guess. And because it had been a collective decision, when times got bad and the call came to get rid of him, we never talked about it again on the board. It's like, remember we said we'd ride this out. We said, nobody said, oh, you didn't ask me, or it was the time we took that everybody had said that decision was their decision. And we never really thought about it again. We got a contract. We've extended him. We'll ride this out.
And does the heat come on pretty badly from the external stakeholders? Those who are investing, the support?
Well, there were a few who went to the media. I think there were 3 different groups that were trying to ask the board, or at least some of us, to step down.
Oh, I spill it in some regard, eh?
Yeah, that sort of thing. And as a lawyer, I thought, I'm not even sure that I legally can do that. But secondly, every year, 3 people rotate on the board, and there's an election. So if you get elected, fine. But we were elected, and so we're not going to stand down. And when the next election came around, nobody ever ran. So it was, if you're not willing to go to the members, and if the members want to turn us out, I'm happy to go with that decision. But we're not going to turn ourselves out just because you have gone to the media and made a big fuss about it. So, and that there's real strength in unity, the board being united. And most of the time, when you read about sporting clubs that are having trouble, it's because something splinters on the board, and somebody wants to go with the new, and somebody's here and somebody's there, and will you make me the new president or something? But when you're together and the collective is very strong, it's really powerful stuff.
When did you start to see the raw starting to come? The positives. like you said, you just got over this big decision. You've made that.
Yeah.
And there's consistency now, finally, as you say, consistency of message.
It probably was about halfway through 2017.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say I thought that, we say the roar, when were we going to realize what we thought our potential was? I thought that we were playing pretty well. There was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of good people had come to the club.
Is business going up as well? Sense of
revenue?
Yeah.
Well,
membership?
with our community programs, what we found is our membership, even when we weren't winning, every year we'd get record membership. It kept going up and up and up and up. And we got in a final, it went up a little bit. We lost that final. The next year went up a bit, went up a bit, went up a bit. And before we won the grand final in 2017, I think we were to 90,000 members. Pretty close.
Yeah, wow.
And then we broke 100,000, and we have, I think, 5 years in a row now. But so that was going there. And again, because of community and because of the way that sponsors consider those things now, our community programs are very important to sponsors. They wanted to be associated with clubs that were sort of fulfilling what they wanted to do in communities. Will you partner with us in communities? So I remember I'd gone overseas for someone's birthday, and I watched a game early in the morning. We played Port Adelaide in the middle of season 2017, July or something like that. And we won, and we weren't expected to win. And we won every other game after that. But I remember thinking, boy, they look really good. And then it was just, so by the time we got to the finals, I thought, if we win the first one, we're going to win a grand final this year. We're just going to keep going. So I was pretty relaxed by the time we got there. But I think it was the middle of that year when you could see things coming together. And it wasn't just football, but there was sort of a different enthusiasm, a different vibe about the place. And things were starting to hum a bit.
Is it contagious? When you walk through, do you feel it?
You do. Yeah, there's a bit of energy, a bit of, happiness is contagious. Just liking coming to work. If you're liking it, other people like to be around people who are having a good time. And it didn't mean it wasn't serious, but it meant that people had this is sort of, we were on our way to sort of finding our purpose. We had a purpose, but we hadn't articulated it as to, you have to feel it to sort of then go into what is it that we've done that led us to here. Let's examine is there some secret sauce here that caused us to win? And we spent a great deal of time across the whole club the next year, and our purpose was connecting to thrive and win. And there was a big launch among the staff, the football department, all the players, everybody came together. And we went back to the middle of the MCG, and we'd only been there before all of this was when we won the grand final a few months earlier. And we put all this stuff up on the big scoreboards, and it was sort of deliberate, connection was the important thing, how this connection had been formed. And it was connecting among the staff, it was connecting with their members, it was connection in lots of ways. And then thriving was connection allowed the thriving, and whether that was thriving as employees, that you develop as a person, you grow as a person, that our communities thrived because of the effort we put into them, and then you thrive and you win. And win is last because that happened because all the other things were in place. And you win on the ground, you win financially. So it was a deliberate placement of words, and we decided that articulated our purpose.
Grand final day, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
What's going through your mind that morning?
Well, again, none of us had been to a grand final. There was nobody in the club that had any grand final experience. The coach had played in a grand final, but there was So
the old cliches, you've got to lose one to win one, is coming out left, right, centre probably.
Yeah. And, we made it. We never thought we'd be here, blah, blah. I was really pretty confident. I had what I do every Saturday. I went to Pilates class. and I then went into, came back, walked down to the stadium. Yep. And went to the AFL lunch, which went on forever, thinking, let's just cut to the chase. We just want to play the game, I had a schedule. If we win, this is what happens. If we lose, this is what happens. And so you had to be at this place at this time, at that time. So I was going to be right on time. And I had a wonderful time. What was going through my head was I never thought we'd be here. I thought I'd be really nervous. And I used to joke with friends. I said, if we were in a grand final, I don't think I'll make it to the ground. I think I'll be hit by a car on Punt Road. I'll just absentmindedly walk out in traffic, or I'll have a heart attack along the way. And so when I got there, it was like, no, we're supposed to be here now. We put in the hard work and we're supposed to be here. And it never occurred to me that we would lose. And I remember saying to Brendan Gale, "Oh, we're home now." "You can't say that. You can't say that. That's jinxing the football gods." But we did.
What was the emotion like when the siren rang?
Well, because I had this schedule to keep, I thought we went down to the ground and got pictures and we did all that. But right when it happened, I was just really proud, but I wasn't that kind of emotional crying. Brendan was crying. Mm-hmm. But, it's different if you've played and you've been, it's a different thing. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was like, well, we said we would do this and we've done it. And now we need to go to these places we need to be, and we need to talk to these people, and we need to get to the media. But then after the media finished, it's probably about Wednesday, and I was home and I watched a replay, and I really welled up with emotion because you could see the faces, when you see it on television, you see the people, and just knowing how hard people had worked I really was moved then more than in the moment. I guess it just hadn't hit me at that time. So, did
you get knocked over by the feeling from the community, Peggy? Now, for some people, it must have meant everything. It's 37 years. As you say, a lot of people, it's so important to them.
Yeah. The enthusiasm in Richmond, because we were having a reception at Crown Casino for the families and for all the players and some of the sponsors. And so I thought, I'll go home, change clothes, and then go to the casino, go to the reception. I couldn't get home. There were so many people stopping me on the way through Richmond, and I thought, I can't get any further than this. So I had a friend who lived on that street, and I went to her house and said, "Can I just sit here for a few minutes?" Because she was going to go to the reception too. And I said, I just need to collect my thoughts because I'm going to have to say something when I get up on stage there. And so we then had to drive all the way through the city to get back around to Crown Casino because there was no way. But I could hear all of the happiness on Swan Street. And we had told Yarra Trams that they probably needed to stop the trams because it was going to be like that, but they didn't believe us. So the crowd stopped the trams. And people were just having the absolute best time. It went a bit wild and all of those kinds of things, but it was a huge outpouring of emotion. And then the next day I walked back to the ground to do Family Day, where people who didn't go to the reception could come and bring their families, and the players were all there. And on the way down, it was just an overwhelming sea of love and getting stopped. And it's almost every day now I still get stopped by somebody. And you think, you don't know me, but you love the club. And at this moment, I'm a symbol of that success for that those years that meant a lot to everyone. And one of the things that impressed me is I got lots of letters from members along the way, and not to do with the grand finals, a lot with that, but some were just families who wrote when a relative died, right, and talked about the good times they had at the football and just wanted me to know how much it meant to them that they were able to go to games together, and that's what they recollect. And I think we all have that. If you like sport, if you have no other thing in common, that you can talk to your relatives about that sort of thing. So it sort of made me realize what an important place clubs can play in people's lives, and that you're a symbol of that and that ambassadorial role in that moment when they approach you that tells them everything they are going to assume about the club. And you can either brush it aside or whatever, but in that moment, you're part of their happiness. And even if you aren't happy that day, you sort of rise to the occasion, and it makes you feel good. It makes you feel good. So it's interesting how that sort of affection gets transferred, but people love the club, and other clubs will have the same sort of stories. But I was just overwhelmed, and still am, that people come up to me and talk about what they were doing in 2017 or 2019.
Well, let's talk about that. 2019 and 2020, COVID.
Yeah, 2020, tough.
I mean, both were still pretty tough, right? You won the flag back to back.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. I must say, I didn't see a game live in 2020 because of COVID, because they had games without crowds, and we were the first game of the season, and we were told the day before that crowds weren't going to be allowed.
Yeah, right.
And thought, oh, well, that'll change.
Yeah.
And then they called the season off for 6 weeks, and then they moved everybody to Queensland. And I could have gone to Queensland, but I had other work to do, and you didn't know how long you were going to be there. First, it was going to be 28 days. They ended up spending 120 days up there. And then there was a window of opportunity to go again, and I just thought I just can't think about spending 6 weeks. And I could go, and then we don't make it into the finals or something, and then I'm just up there, and I don't know if I can get back into Victoria. Anyway, it was one of those sorts of things. But I think when football started again, that it really gave people something interesting and fun to do in COVID. But
during this period, how are you engaging with your members? It's a different engagement now, isn't it?
It is. A lot of, people had bought memberships and thought they had access to games. And it just shows sort of how happy people were with us that, I don't know, a handful of people asked for their money back. Others just said, this is our financial support for we'd won another grand final. Yep. And it wasn't that, but I think this will be temporary. We want the club to keep going. We'd had the horrible situation of having to let go about a third of the staff because we didn't have any functions anymore. And the AFL was telling everyone to, bare bones, in the clubs. And for example, we have an event staff, but if you aren't going to hold any events, and then we were eligible for job keeper and sort of those kinds of things. But it was just so new to deal with. And then when football came back and still no vaccinations, people weren't wearing masks. People had to use mops and buckets and clean up all the space when they were training. Mm-hmm. And then the other person, it was just. But everybody was committed to keeping the game going to the best they could. And it would have been nice to see something live, but I didn't get to. But 2019, we had a really good season. Probably our best home and away season was 2018 when we failed in the preliminary final. Yeah. We were just flying. And I know the coach said a couple of times after that, we were going so well that we didn't change anything. And we should have changed something. But why tamper with success and blah, blah, blah. And so, then 2019 was that, we've got another chance at this, and we played really good football that year. It was the first time we'd had a lot of injuries, and we had to work through that, but we did. And then we had a great final series. And I remember, in 2020 with COVID and all that, and And Brendan Gale saying, but, we could go back to back. And I said, Brendan, I don't even know that we ought to be playing. I said, we'll have another year. We'll have another year. I just don't want people to feel under more pressure than they already are. It's a very scary time. Yeah. He goes, no, I'm not giving up. I think we can do it if we start playing again. And we did. And I remember he called me after we'd won. And I said, you're right. It does make a difference, doesn't it? You feel different, that this is sort of the stamp of, yes, this was an exceptional team.
Well, it was unbelievable, wasn't it? Players, they're vulnerable as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
They've got the great opportunity to be heroes one week, according to the press. They use that kind of language, and next thing they're almost in the gutter, the following week, by a photo or something like that. How does the club keep them balanced, or the work behind it? Because it must be so invasive, and your confidence must go up and down, different personalities. And I think sometimes we've just lost sight of what the press does to people.
Oh, I think you're right. I think it gets out of hand. It's the same person, and again, not treating them in a way that you would treat a stranger, even, about the benefit of the doubt, and wanting to have the villain and the hero in every piece. And as we know, mental health issues with athletes is rife, and a lot of work goes into giving them that kind of support. And I think people tend to think you're an athlete, you're young, you got to be
indestructible.
Everything's going well. What do you got to complain about? That it's some cause and effect because you don't have financial worries, you ought to be happy. I think people project whatever their worry is. You don't have my worry, so you ought to be happy.
Right.
But the pressure on them, whether from the media or their own internal pressure of being an excellent athlete and wanting to sustain that for as long as they can, and the ones who are on the margin about getting picked for the side, or what's next, or are they going to trade me? It's the uncertainty of that sort of thing that's out of your control. And one thing about forging that connection among teammates means that you're more aware of people's situation. And the training for the coaches and assistant coaches to recognize things in a way, not to wait for people to come to them, but for them to say, is something wrong? Do you need help? And then having psychologists on staff, having access to others outside if they want to go external and that sort of thing. But for it to be accepted that you can say, I'm struggling here and I am going to need some help. And I think more and more we're starting to see people not be ashamed to do that. And I think that's a sign that perhaps we're maturing about those sorts of things. But when people are writing things in the press in a very, disparaging way or a judgmental way, I think, well, what would it be? How would you feel if somebody wrote about you? And how would all of us feel if somebody was watching us at work every day and writing about how we were going? I think that we lose sight of the humanity of sports stars.
So we've talked about why I want to become a member of Richmond. Why would I want to play for Richmond? I've got choice. Why did I want to play for Richmond? Is it the family club mentality?
Well, I don't know. When we say family, I think, well, what is family values? It's not, it doesn't revolve around just that. It's, I think it's community values. I think it's a spot for everybody, whether you're in a traditional family or not. That I've often said, if anybody wants to barrack for a club, I want them to think they can come to us, and that they'll be welcome. And so, why do you want to play? Because a lot of people self-select about where they want to be, and if that's the kind of values that you have. But if you come to Richmond, that's to play. That's what we will instill in you, that everybody is valuable, and that your job is to make them understand that. So sometimes there's the connection. And last year in the club, we did a bit of reading together about belonging, belonging's beyond the connection stuff. And Owen Eastwood has written a great book on belonging. And he spoke to us about the book online. And the players read it, the coaches read it, the board read it. And it was about belonging, building that sense of trust. And the club I know right now is moving on to that next stage of why would you want to play for us? Why would you want to be a member? Is because it goes much deeper than just paying your money and going to a game.
What about when they finish? You hear the tragedy. A lot of them struggle, as you talked about mental well-being. They come off the high of being superstars in the press every day. Suddenly, only once in a while, in the back column. Does Richmond think about that 15 years on for those individuals supported and played for their club, or what happens these days out there?
Yeah, well, we have player development managers through their career as a player, to try to help them identify what they might want to do, to start on a degree, to start on a traineeship, to work with their managers. Most of them have managers about what we can do to make sure that they're set up for after football. And then the AFL Players Association also has a number of programs that they can take advantage of as well. We also have a Past Players Association that reaches out and has functions from time to time that's becoming more active. And also, one of the things we started when I was president, it was a thing called Homecoming Hero. And at every home game, we have a past player come back and we, fete them, and they kick the first goal before the game starts, and their family comes, and we have them for lunch and those sorts of things. And that's sort of one-off, but we want them to think no matter what era you played in, and the same with administrators, CEOs, presidents, everybody was doing their best.
Yeah, right.
And where we are because of you kept trying and you worked hard for the club. So we want everybody to come back. We want everybody to feel at home. And so we invite them, and the idea there'd be hard feelings or somebody had the board coup who overthrew someone else is we'll just be past that. And you're welcome. All of you are welcome, and you can decide whether you want to come or not. But players in the end of their careers is an issue. But I think more and more often is they have a pretty good idea and some credentials about what they want to do when they leave the club.
Peggy, you've had a better view than all of us. When you watch the preparation, the mindset, what does it take, or what stood out in a sense of stories, or over and beyond, or playing through pain in some cases, or rebounding back from a bad game? What did you see? Was there any particular individuals or personalities or surprises you must have seen during those 3 grand final wins?
About selflessness, I've seen quite a bit of that. There was in our 2019 preliminary final, we had a player, Jack Graham, who was injured, but we didn't have a substitute. Anyway, he kept playing with a bad shoulder injury and kicked a couple of goals and got us across the line. So we're in a grand final, and he can't play because he's injured. And he's gone through the whole year. He's done that. And he was given our Francis Burke Award, which is the most courageous player. And he was the youngest player in 2017. It was his 5th game, and he kicked 3 goals in that grand final. And then 2019, he didn't get to play in the grand final. And then 2020, he's still playing. But I remember the feeling of missing out. But he's the one who was pretty instrumental. Everybody played a part, but he was pretty instrumental in sticking through and getting us into the grand final. So that's one of the examples. And he was as happy as anybody about us making it there.
Can you share some insight to those listening today, what you've done engaged in regards to women in sport, women in business, mentoring? You've done a lot. You want to talk us through, and you've led some, ministerial reviews as well.
I guess it goes back to my family saying, you can always help somebody.
Okay.
And my enthusiasm for helping women be treated as equals is sort of knows no bounds.
Okay.
I always thought that society as a whole is better off, and if everybody can contribute. There's a whole pool of talent there. And when I grew up, in the place I grew up, there were lots of people who didn't think that girls even needed to be educated, because they'll get married and all of that. And there weren't a lot of ideas that you'd go on to do anything anyway. So after I became president of Richmond, it was the first year, and the state government asked me to chair an inquiry into women and girls in sport and recreation.
Yeah.
So I thought, I got some time in the off season. I'll help with this. So it was a year-long review, and it was we went around the state. We talked to all sorts of organizations and sporting organizations, to young women, to administrators, and we wanted to look at participation and leadership. In the past, some reviews had looked just at leadership. Some had just looked at how can we get more women and girls playing sport. But this was to look at both and to come up with some recommendations. Because there'd been so much work done in the past, but nothing ever happened with it. It just was a report.
Okay.
And so we thought if we keep it sharp and have a few recommendations, it's more likely. And so we had 9. And the state government, John Aaron was the Minister for Sport and Rec at the time, accepted all 9 and then put $1 million into a year-long implementation planning and then rolled it out. But one of the things that we recommended, which was quite, I guess, dramatic or progressive at the time, was that every sporting organization board, if they wanted money from the state government, had to get 40% women on the board in 3 years.
Yeah, right, okay.
And there was a lot of, we can't do that, we can't do that. It's like, well, if you don't want any state money, that's okay. And then about year 2, I started seeing little ads pop up online or somewhere about women who might want to join sporting boards. Come this weekend, we've got some. And I thought, okay, so they're getting things in order. And lo and behold, it happened.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Yeah, and so you think was that. Another thing that was recommended was a lot of duplication of effort between health and sport and education, that we needed a central office. And so Victoria was the first state in the country, and might still be the only, that set up an office of women and girls in sport and started a Change Our Game campaign to keep the momentum going. So that was really a rewarding sort of thing. I didn't know when I started. And again, I'm thinking, I know how to run a meeting. I know how to write a report. I don't know anything about state sporting organizations, but it was a great committee that was put together. And they had people who were athletes, people who had been administrators, people who were academics. There were 9 of us, people from around the state. And it was a really great experience. So I did that. Then there's a group called the Minerva Network that's been started for introducing professional sportswomen to business people to help them with their career after sport and what happens. And so I was the inaugural co-chair for Victoria. And so we set that up. It started in New South Wales and Queensland, and then came to Victoria. And again, that was about helping people identify and realize what they wanted to do after sport.
How's that gone? Has that worked out well?
It has. It has. I'm no longer co-chairing that. There were so many people who were willing to help, and so many young athletes who wanted the help. And so doing the mentor match for that was really good. And I don't think I spoke to any businesswoman who didn't agree to do it. So it's really, and exposes you to people that if you're in sports, you're unlikely to meet, and just new networks and avenues that opens up.
So is Australia thinking the right way in regards to this whole broader issue?
Yes. As I say, there's still, more work that all of us can do, but, and to keep the momentum up is the big thing.
Yeah.
And for example, when I came onto the Richmond board in 2005, I think there were 6 women on AFL boards across the country. And I kept a list because I used to organize dinners for us a couple of times a year and it started out, we could, very small, we could all meet around one table, and there were no women. There was 1 woman on the commission then. Now there are 3, but I think now there are 37.
Yeah.
across the country. And most boards, you think, well, you have one. But now if you don't have 2 or 3, you're regarded as, why not? And some people have said, well, getting women on boards is the easy part of it. And I said, well, let's solve that easy part then, because it does open up to other perspectives and other life experiences being included. And it shows the inclusive nature of things. And I think it's slow. And I guess at this stage of my life and my career, I think people have always said, oh, it's building, it'll come. And I thought when I graduated from law school, they said that would be the case, that we'd all be partners in law firms. And all these years later, law firms still haven't solved that because of the business model and that sort of thing. But I've also found that if you want to include women or you want to include multicultural people or indigenous people, you got to go find them. It's not waiting for people to say, I'll put up my hand.
Yeah, right.
If you think there's some really good people that could add something, just ask them if they will go through the nominations process. They may not be interested at all. But if you wait, it's just going to take longer and longer and longer.
What was your takeaways from the Matildas then?
Well, it was pretty exciting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I miss them. Well, it shows how things can change when there's it's a world event.
Yeah.
There's money and media, particularly behind it.
Mm-hmm.
The product is really good.
Yep.
Women playing sport is really attractive. Look what the women's cricket team has done, women's hockey, and now the AFLW. It's fun to watch. It's exciting to see. But someone has got to get behind it with, we're not always going to have the World Cup. We're going to have people who have a national competition or a local competition. And it goes to, I guess, showcasing what's there. But the Matildas, I think, made people aware of how good women's sport is and how you can have national pride, but you can just enjoy. I watched matches that had nothing to do with the Matildas, and I hadn't really followed soccer that much, but I did. I think a lot of people as well. So a lot of people just need to be exposed to women playing sport.
Okay. Tricky question for you. Now, you were appointed chair of the Commonwealth Games.
Uh-huh.
Can you share any light what's transpired? Now, is anybody going to pick up the Commonwealth Games from what you understand?
I was appointed just about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I was chair of the organizing committee. And what we were charged with doing was there's a host contract between the state government, Commonwealth Games Federation, Commonwealth Games Australia, and we're charged with implementing that contract. Some other departments of government had parts of it. We had part of it. And we were notified that the contract was going to be canceled.
Surprised?
And it was a budgetary issue.
Yeah.
I was surprised and not totally surprised. I mean, I have nothing to do with politics, so I'm not. I don't know the political what's going on, but under our budget numbers that we had put together, we needed more money, and we were not. The reply was taking longer to get back than normal. And I thought, it's going to be hard to bring this off in 3.5 years because there's so much to do.
Because it was predominantly regional too, wasn't it?
It's regional, yeah. And just the logistics of that, because taking this on, I thought, and Jerome Weinmar, who is a logistics guy, was the CEO. And he knows how things work and how government works because he had been involved through COVID, and he'd say, no, we still don't have an answer. And so we started thinking, well, something's going on, there's just not this push that we need. And, but I didn't know it would be a cancellation.
Yep.
But in the end, if there's no money, there's no money. And we didn't have the overview of all of the costs. We just knew what our part was going to cost, our new projections. So I was called and then the next day received a letter saying to, in fact, down tools, and that it's been canceled, and that there's going to be a negotiation about settlement of any damages, and that's where it was. I haven't heard anything about anyone taking it on.
No, nor have I yet.
But I wouldn't necessarily know. But I haven't even, heard any scuttlebutt about. I would doubt it would be in Australia.
The only question I wonder sometimes, we're bearing in mind the challenges and the costs, no matter what, for the Commonwealth Games. And there's very few nations left who can afford it. Okay,
That's it.
So are we being silly as a nation in that regard, or was there an opportunity to actually think differently? Did everything have to be in Victoria, in Melbourne historically, or then the region in this particular case?
Yeah.
We've got Queensland building stuff left, right and centre. You've got facilities in different parts of the country. Should we convene, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here and said, right, we're not going to be able to pull this off by putting it in rural Victoria. It's going to be prohibitive, unfortunately, on cost. But we've won it. Why don't we break with tradition and make it a national play instead of just the one-off, one-off state or one-off city? I mean, because otherwise we could lose this forever.
Yeah, and I think also that you're right. It's expensive to hold any international competition, and the Commonwealth itself has some very poor countries.
That's right,
and a few pretty wealthy countries, and I don't know that those wealthy countries necessarily see any benefit of continuing to do this.
Yeah.
I was thinking, why don't they have a permanent site for the Commonwealth Games in one country and don't move it around? Just have it there, and people can, if you have a Commonwealth Games association in your country, you get levied a certain amount, and that maintains. But you have a set of something, a showground to. That's what I was thinking. Why not just make it a permanent place? Why does it have to be moved around? And I don't know if the Olympics would be the same, but the Olympics themselves will have, it's a very, very expensive undertaking, and usually for not much benefit. There's always the talk about tourism and this, but I saw some figures. It might have been in the Fin Review a few weeks ago when it happened with the Commonwealth Games about nobody's really made any money on these kinds of international sporting events. And we don't know what happened in China. So I don't know. And the idea was having it regionally was going to be the difference. And that if it could be done regionally, that maybe like in the Caribbean, a number of islands could have a few of the events.
Yeah.
But one thing I found out is usually if it's in one place, they have a team captain that goes around to all the sports every day. But if you have them in different places, then you got to have, how do you get around to your athlete well-being if all the swimming's here, so all the Australians are here, and then you have rowing here, and the Australians are over there too, and they're in New South Wales and Western Australia. So there's those kinds of things which were new. I just hadn't thought about how that has to be organized. But there's a lot of people required just to get the teams put together and out on the whatever park they're playing on. So I don't know. It was really a wonderful group of people. Great executive team, put together a really exciting program. A lot of work was done, and one point of difference was the engagement of all the First Nations peoples. We had a First Nations advisory. Everything was, and with that, we were also going to have connections and themes that went through the Indigenous peoples all across the Commonwealth. That was very exciting to all of us, and someone else will have to take that up now.
RMIT, what are you doing there?
Well, I'm the Chancellor.
Yep.
And
what are you what's going to be the future for RMIT?
Well, there's a lot of thought and planning into the whole university sector right now.
Absolutely.
And there's a university accord that's an interim report. It will be a final report on what government support's going to be there, what courses are going to be emphasized. We last year put out our 9-year strategy, and this is the first 3-year part of the 9 years, because things have changed so much even with COVID. But before then, it was quite different to have an online learning capacity. Like people who are working can do it on the weekends or at night. And now everything went online. So what's the future of online learning when every course has an online component mostly these days? the returning to work and teaching. I think maybe a lot of universities thought, do we have too many buildings? Do we need all these buildings because of the way things are going to be structured? Is research going to take priority over teaching? What are the jobs of the future that we need to anticipate now? And RMIT is really an applied learning institution that's very much partners with business and wants to turn out have a lot of the learning takes place in having internships with during your academic career, internships with various businesses. So what is the future of that under the Accord? So everything's sort of up in the air. We're going ahead with what we had planned. Mm-hmm. Lifelong learning is the thing, too. People don't keep jobs in the same length of time. Yep. And these micro-credentials, I don't want to get a degree. I already have a degree, but I'd like to take 3 months and get through 2 courses on this because that I think that's my next job.
Is that the role of university, or is that the role of another tertiary form? I thought university was historically there to engender thinking, challenge. Mm. It's changing a lot, and I'm sort of wondering where it's really the concept came from universities to where they are now. Are they still espousing the same beliefs and values?
Well, it's sort of what do you want them to do? And RMIT is what they call a dual sector university. Mm-hmm. It's higher education and vocational education as well. But even in what we call higher education, which is the traditional sort of degree granting programs, lots of engineering, architecture, creative arts, is those jobs require a constant renewing of your knowledge because it moves so fast.
Yeah.
So they'll come back and say, well, I need 2 courses in this because that's the new computer stuff program that we use to do all of this engineering work. Yep. Then there's vocational education and we need more trades. Yep. And then there's like Melbourne University is higher education and research. But they would say their purpose is different than our purpose. But universities seem, with, I guess, the end of sort of the TAFE era, that Swinburne, RMIT turn out lots of people who are the applied learners. And RMIT started as the working men's college. And it was for people who had trades. The sort of vision of the founder was they would want to learn. Yep. And so that was quite revolutionary at the time. Yes. And so he founded this, and then he went on to give money to Melbourne University to start Ormond College. It's interesting where those come from, but our origins are very much in applied learning.
Yeah, I sometimes sort of think about all the online verse turning up in the physical, mixing of people. It's going to form you in some ways when you're a younger person. You're going to learn to argue, debate in a manner as opposed to zooming in, which is totally different. And it's also, you're forming your political views and your international thinking, as you said earlier. We're mindful of that, or we'll be starting to lose that a little bit in our universities.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. There's nothing that replaces being with people and exchanging ideas in person. And even just the casual running into instructors and having a chance to talk to them, making everybody real, and the social networks that get formed, the things to do, and that's the basis of the community. It was very encouraging to see so many more students back this semester, and that there's sort of a buzz around the place. And because when I came on at the beginning of 2022, that first year was a bit of little by little coming back, and now there seems to be among students a real desire to come back. We have a campus for the past 20 years in Vietnam, and I went over for the graduations in April, and the students there, you can't get them to go home. Right. They love being at the campus. It's like, no, we're not going to stay open 24 hours a day. You have to go home. So that was a bit different. They operated throughout COVID and all of that. But we're seeing it gradually come back here. But one thing that's happening too with students is because the job market's so good, is people who used to go full-time, maybe going part-time and have a job as well. So that affects the numbers who come back and all that. But I think we'll see a restoring of that balance, hopefully in the next academic year.
Peggy, what is leadership? You've had plenty of time to see the good and the bad and the ugly. What actually is leadership to you?
Oh, that's not an easy question. Well, I always think about, why do people want to be leaders? Why do some people want to be a leader? The first thing everybody would say is having a title doesn't make you a leader. I think that there's some people who want to be a leader, they think, and then don't want the responsibility, don't want the sort of hard stuff. And leaders, I think, are able to persuade people to accomplish something positive. That is the persuasive nature rather than the dictatorial kind of nature. But I think the best leaders are those who see themselves as servants to the organization and to the people around them. I think that's the development because you can't do it all yourself. What you want is to have other people who can do things really well, and you get so much more done, and you can just accomplish so much. And I think that the organization matters, the people you bring in matters, the leader's job is to get the best out of everybody. And when you leave that organization, it ought to be able to continue those values. And you hope that you're missed a bit, but at the same time, you hope that things continue on what you've built.
So what's next for you? And I appreciate you've got the role of Chancellor of RMIT, but what else is the longer term that you want to achieve, Peggy?
I'll finish up with the Commonwealth Games. We're still doing some tidy up things.
Yep.
And I'm also chair of Vanguard Super, which is an investment thing. So that and RMIT will sort of see me out to finish this. Next year, I'll probably think about it a bit more. But one thing I've wanted to do, and I've started, is I'd started a couple of books. And so I'd like to think I have a bit of space in my calendar to at least get those finished. I wrote a book during COVID that was, this bit of trying to get some structure in the day.
Yep.
And really enjoyed it. Was personally satisfied to finish it. I had it published, but it wasn't for commercial sale. I just gave it to people, so it was self-published. But I found at the end of COVID, I was sending an email a day. I was doing something fun. And I had this, at the end, I thought, I've got a book. And I thought, if you write a page a day, after 6 months, you got a book. So I sort of set myself the goal that I'll finish at least one of them this year. And then I'll see about the next one. I've always enjoyed reading and writing. And so I've always said to myself that, you will write a book one day. And I think, well, this is maybe the universe speaking that suddenly there's a bit of time and I'll finish that.
Okay. And if you were to look back at, as you're writing this book, if you were to look back at that young girl in those Virginian mountains all those years ago, what advice would you give her now? Oh,
just keep that curiosity. Just keep and keep learning. And the world's a big place, and you're on the right path. Just keep going.
On that, Peggy, it's been a real pleasure today. Thank you for joining us.
It's nice talking to you.
You've been listening to No Limitations.